So I think let's go more into the mechanics of karma, just how Buddha says it really works, you know, trying to understand it, based on this idea that we are the creators of ourselves. Which, as I said, is a brand new concept. It's quite an interesting concept, you know, to put it that way. It's quite a surprise, actually, because there's a view very deeply in us, whether we're, like I said, whether we're materialists or religious, and these are the only two options on this earth. Someone else always made you. So to hear there's another view that says, no, no one made you, this is a big surprise, I think. It's not brand new. In fact, it's 2,500 years old. But even when most people think about Buddhism, you don't really see karma in this way. We see it in a very cliched, superficial way, you know. So, karma, if you're using the analogy of seeds and fruits, ripens in 4 ways, basically. There's different ways of talking about it, but I find this is quite helpful little structure. Karma ripens. The seeds you plant in your mind, in other words, in the past, ripen in the present in 4 main ways. And it's very helpful to structure it like this. The first one is called the fully ripened result. The fully ripened result. And what this refers to is the very kind of life that you get born into, meaning human, animal, whatever. You see? So, okay, let's look a bit at this one. Step back a second. What Buddha's saying, like I mentioned last night, you know, as far as minds are concerned, or these sem-chens, mind possessors, the term in Tibetan for sentient being, right? There's not an atom of space, Buddha would say, where you won't find sentient beings. And that means literally an atom of space. In other words, everywhere is pervaded by sentient beings. Now, if we look in this room, we can see a few humans, but there's an awful lot of space around, isn't there? But if we look into our body, and I remember reading quite a few years ago something about if we just looked under our armpits, we would faint with horror at the thought of the number of creatures living there, just our own armpits, you know. So, you know, you look in those animal movies and they get their big kind of, you know, big cameras onto things. You can see everywhere there are tiny, tiny creatures. This is just the animal realm, you know, little tiny creatures. And then you look, you know, I can remember one time when they had this big kind of a thing inside the belly of an ox. It was like a zoo in there, you know. I mean, so in our own body too, why not? So wherever there is space, you're going to find sentient beings of one form or another, you know. So just that alone we can imagine. You know, in the air, they say there are so many, those little miniature creatures, you know, in the air. And so many, what do they call those little mites? They're tiny little creatures, isn't it? But if we can't see, we just see air, you know, we see space. So wherever there are sentient beings. And now the Buddha would give status to those beings as having mind, just like we have mind. Clearly, there are different ways minds manifest. Minds manifest in a human body, or a mind manifests in a little tiny insect, or a mind manifests in a lion's body. But they're all mind possessors. So, you know, of course, the Western world buys into the Christian teaching. And I'm not criticising, by the way, just saying these things. The views we tend to have are that, you know, humans have a soul, but others don't. So that's why we don't think animals suffer. We're seeing a bit now that animals do, especially the big ones. We think they suffer now. Or we think the ones we're attached to suffer. We don't care if rats suffer, we just don't want rats, you know. But you hurt your little pussycat that way, you'd all be horrified. So, you know, we're now beginning to see, or certainly we're beginning to maybe see, that maybe creatures suffer, maybe ants suffer, but because they don't have a soul, and because they don't have a brain, we tend to think they don't. But the Buddha would say they also are mind possessors. And so these minds, which, you know, are not innately human. Our mind is not innately human, not innately animal, not innately insect. And that also is an interesting point, because many people think about reincarnation but would tend to have the view that you keep being a human. There's some human quality to your mind, you know. Well, Buddha would say no. At the time you die, and we'll talk about the death process at some point, you know, death is described in this, it's a gradual process of sort of throwing off first the grosser levels of your being, your physicality, your sensory experiences, to the point where you're just mind. And by the time your mind leaves the body, They call it very subtle consciousness, very subtle mind. Well, that mind, that level of consciousness, the subtlest level of our conscious being, no longer has Robina nature, female nature, Australian nature, human nature even. Not any kind of nature, but it has the potential. This is the point. It has the potential because of the karmic seeds you planted during Robina's life. Do you see? So all the actions we do, as I'm saying, can ripen in different ways. And one of the ways is the type of life you get born into. So at the time of the death of a mind, and it could be a human mind, a person who is in a human body, and that human life finishes, and then at the time of death is when that consciousness has gone to the very subtle level and then propelled on autopilot by the karma it created. At the time of death in particular, the very strong karmic imprint that is one of the seeds that is a seed of the main propensity, let's say, of you in that life. Let's say you're a person who just, went fishing and killed the ants and badmouthed your next door neighbour and followed your anger and not a very particularly bad person, no kind of Hitler or anything, just a regular and ordinary person. But you never looked at your mind, you never tried to practice anything, you never tried to change yourself, you just followed your own instincts and you kill the rats and kill the roaches and all this kind of thing. Well, the killing one is quite heavy, and we're going to go into this and analysing just why, really dissecting it all. But for the Buddha, he would say that killing is one of the heaviest actions we can do, and it's motivated, like we're talking here, it's motivated by anger, basically, why we kill, Unless it's, of course, fishing, you're motivated by attachment. But generally, killing is intense because it's a very strong action coming from a very strong emotion, anger, the wish to harm. So that's a very potent karma to practice, to keep in your mind, a potent mental habit, basically. So at the time of death, that karma, that habit is the one that will ripen very strongly. And this killing seed, the killing karma would be the strongest one. So that would then propel that consciousness on autopilot, such that when it leaves the body, that karma is the one, that action, that habit, is what then will propel that consciousness. It's a force of its own, karma, to find its way to, let's say, a lion mummy's womb, So in our case, according to Buddha, here we are called humans, okay? So Buddha would say that getting a human life is the result of an accumulation of a lot of morality. Getting an animal life is the accumulation of immorality, of harming. Getting a human life, broadly speaking, is the accumulation of a lot of virtue, a lot of morality, a lot of non-harming. So we can deduce that we must have practiced, consciously practiced non-harming in a past life, which is pretty miraculous if you look at the world, And that the morality karma ripened at the time of our death, our past death, not more than 7 human weeks before the conception in our present mother's womb. And that karma, by the time our consciousness left that body, that propelled it. That propelled our consciousness. That's the power that drives it. The momentum of what you've said and thought and done, it's got its own power. That's the momentum that drives you. We can see, when in this life even, anger is very strong momentum, isn't it? It'll cause you to go do this, get a gun, do that, do this. It's driving you, it's driving your mind. And then your body's just the servant of the mind. Well, it's like that. Between lives, same. Your mind is propelled by the force of this habit, this anger, and that causes your mind to go to the lion's mummy's womb. You're attracted to that one. In the human case, your mind runs like a magnet to your mummy and daddy. There they were, minding their own business there, and you come along, It's a kind of more complex process, but we'll talk about it. But the first way your karma ripens is in the type of form that you get born into, in our case, human. So in fact, if we really realised how much we must have worked at goodness in a past life, or more than one, to just be who we are this life, we would faint. It would blow our minds. But you look at that. We don't think this. We think someone else made me. And all we do is moan and complain about it. If we realise how much morality we practiced, probably practiced in the context of a spiritual path, and probably practiced even in the context of keeping vows of morality, how hard we must have worked just to get this human life, would blow our minds. This is the Buddhist approach. So in this sense, quite literally, the creators of ourselves. Independence upon mummy and daddy, sure. but the momentum, the karma, the actions, the mind, the habits that caused us to go to that human womb. Morality, non-harming. So that's just one. Mother Teresa's got one of those, and so has Hitler. Okay? So the causes are similar for both of them. But that's just the beginning. Now you can look to the second way that your karma ripens, and this is where you can see the distinction between the Hitlers and the Mother Teresas. It's their personalities, isn't it? It's their tendencies. It's their characteristics. They've both got hands, but the hand itself doesn't stroke or shoot unless, it's dependent on what's in the mind, isn't it? So that's the second way that karma ripens, and they call that actions similar to the cause. Action in this dynamic sense. So you look into your mind, and you're going to see you've got a bunch of propensities, and you can see it since you're a little kid. A tendency to lie, a tendency to be angry, tendency to be depressed, tendency to kill the ant, tendency to save the ant, tendency to laugh, to cry, to be depressed. Look at us, and we've just then been honing that personality since we're tiny, haven't we? Now that personality, as Buddha's saying, does not come from your mother and father. It comes from your tendencies. Just like my tendency to play music doesn't come, my ability to play music today does not come directly from my teacher. She's a catalyst. It's from my own propensity, which is in my mind. And I did the work. Well, the same. We become fully programmed. Because at the time of death, the karma that ripens that caused us to go to our human mummy's womb also caused a bunch of other tendencies to ripen that would form the personality of that person, of you. And there's just a tiny few tendencies there. We've got the karmic imprints to be lions, to be murderers, to be Hitler, to be monsters, But they're not ripening in this life. Just a few, aren't they? Some bad, some good. Our personality. So depending on, and it's a highly complex process, and no one's running the show. It's a natural law, you can think of a person like Hitler, for example. There's a classic example, of a human being, but he's got these tendencies, and you look into his actions and his life, and you can deduce what his tendencies were, what his viewpoints were, what his view of the universe was. I mean, pretty deluded view, right? His views were quite strange, quite weird, quite negative, quite harmful. So look what he did, We can deduce from Mother Teresa's behaviour that she had a few decent tendencies in there, a genuine wish to help others, to be of benefit, and so on and so forth. So we can deduce from our life too what our tendencies are. So this is where we get confused in the West, because we're so convinced that our mummy and daddy made us. Then of course when we go to our therapist, and the therapist has got that view too, the first thing we want to do is see how mummy and daddy treated you. Of course, because we think that's the main cause. But it falls apart, that view, very easily. You just look at the world. I remember always the vivid experience, the vivid example for me was the time of the Columbine shootings, those two kids, remember? Well, of course, it was so outrageous what they did, so insane. You watch that video they made, their minds were really, really, really disturbed. Talk about crazy viewpoints. So paranoid, so suffering, so deluded. And look what they did, based on their viewpoints. So the first thing everybody wants to do, of course, is find someone to blame. So the first thing you blame is the parents. So people then discover that their parents were just nice, white, Christian people, and they couldn't find anything the parents did that they could blame. So people were even more angry because you couldn't blame anybody. No one believed that we think that, but there has to be something the parents did to make these children be this way, because that's the only way we go. We don't know where else to look, But when you have an extreme example like that, it's sort of it really brings into focus how it is not just the external. It reinforces this Buddhist view that those kids came programmed with their own crazy minds, And then based on very strong karmic connection with those people that they harmed, the whole scenario. It's a very different way to see the world, The same with good qualities, no difference. So, for example, you can look at one child who, when they see a snail, will stamp on it. They'll stomp on it and just laugh, We'll go, oh, well, that's just kids. But that's not true, I'm sorry. I always quote this example. A friend of mine told me about when she was taking the lice out of her little boy's hair. You know, he was 3. And he was in tears, begging her, "Mummy, Mummy, leave them alone. Don't hurt them. It's their home." He tried every method he could to get her to leave the lice alone and stop harming them. In his own head, right? He's 3. She hadn't taught him this. So it's in his mind. In his mind. Hitler's qualities. I mean, you can't blame poor old Hitler's Austrian housewife mummy. What the hell did she do, you know, to cause a Hitler? Don't be ridiculous. It's just too far-fetched, you know. It doesn't answer the question. But when you have a simple example that seems to fit, then we kind of lock it in place and say, oh yeah, look at that. There it is. It proves it. So I remember another little killing after the Columbine one was this little black kid who killed some 3-year-old kid at school. So within 2 minutes they had it all sewn up. Daddy was in prison, Mummy's a junkie, Uncle had a gun, oh yeah, that's why he is the way he is. It all fitted our philosophy. But the Columbine one doesn't fit, so we just get confused. You see my point here? So it's, you know, it's both. It's nurture and nature, as we keep asking. So the person, we think the person comes into this life as an empty slate. Because of course, if your mummy and daddy make you, you know, the only place we can look is their genes. But the Buddha would say, you come fully programmed with the qualities that are the ones that ripen at the time of your past death, that are your propensities. You know? So that little boy had the propensity not to want to harm sentient beings, and he's now 30 or something. And, you know, and all his life has shown that's who he really is a really compassionate, non-harming person. Since he was conceived, those imprints have been in his mind. And where did they come from? His past habit. Just like my ability to play piano today is from my past habit of playing the piano, you know. So we come programmed in this second way with the tendencies that form our personality, the actions similar to the cause. So, you know, it's not rocket science. You have a tendency to kill. Guess what? It's because you've killed before. You have a tendency to play music because you've played music before. You have a tendency to lie because you've lied before. And we can see as since little tiny children that we've got all these tendencies. Mummy didn't teach us to lie and steal. We ran to it like a magnet. In the same way that this little boy ran like a magnet to not harming, you know. They're in your own mind. You've got them stored in there, these tendencies. So in that sense too, we are the creators of our own personality, you know. So I can look into my family and I can see my father harmed me. So the usual one is you blame the father for why Robina was angry. But another one of my sisters had the same father, the same abuse, but she didn't get angry. Oh, well, what's the cause of this then? We'll go. The difference simply is that I had angry tendencies and my sister didn't. Same treatment. She responded in other ways, you know, but not anger, because anger was my tendency, but it wasn't hers. So this is where we can really help people. If we're therapists or just mothers, you know, we need to understand the person, understand their little personality. Look at them. Don't look at what we think someone else did to them all the time. This is how we think about the anger. Well, who must have harmed them? You know, they're angry. Don't think that way. Just look at the person themselves, their little mind themselves, their tendencies. And you can see when you see the children in this way, you can really learn to help them. Some lie, some steal, some don't, some do. Just see them for their own minds, because they are what they are. Then you can help that person. The third way your karma ripens is called experiences similar to the cause. Experiences similar to the cause. And that's all the stuff that happens to you. All the stuff that people do to you. The good and the bad. Basically that. Because you can see, you've got your own tendencies. And then you live in this very interdependent world, don't you, with other people who do things to you. Who harm you, who help you, who are kind to you, who are mean to you, who rape you, who steal from you, who love you. Do you see? A whole mixture. So of course, again, often in our life we tend to try to link our own tendencies with the way people harm us and see us or are good to us. But it doesn't always mix, it doesn't always work, you know. In other words, you can see there are bad people that have good things happen to them. And you can see good people have bad things happen to them. So you can't, there's not necessarily a link between those two. So obviously, it's clear, if I'm sitting here angry and I punch you in the nose and you're angry and you'll punch me back, well, there's a relationship. But it doesn't follow, because people who don't punch get harmed, and people who do punch don't get harmed. There are lots of people who commit terrible crimes who never go to prison. And there are lots of people who don't commit any crimes who get blamed and who go to prison. We know these things. So there's not always a direct relationship between how you are and what people do to you. We can see, of course, there's an awful lot there, but it's not the only thing. That's why we go crazy sometimes in a relationship, and you've been really kind and really nice to this person. They wake up one day and they can't stand you anymore, and you don't know what you've done wrong. Well, you haven't done anything wrong. You haven't. But because we have so much attachment, which we're going to talk about, we identify ourselves in the way that other people see us. So if somebody always is, since a little child, you've always been seen as mean and ugly, and people criticise you and beat you up every day, then inevitably, because you have these tendencies and because we have attachment and because we have anger, you're going to identify yourself in that way, because we don't know how to identify ourselves in our own way without how other people see us. We're so locked into this, So if people beat you every day, then don't be surprised you're going to think you're a mean, ugly person. But you're not necessarily. But we're so dependent, because of attachment, on other people's views, So obviously, if you're walking around stealing and lying and no one's ever blaming you and they all think you're a successful business person, you'll get all arrogant and think you're so clever. Because no one's noticing you being such a mean person. I mean, that's another aspect. So what I'm getting at here simply is we have tendencies, and that's a particular way that our past actions from the past ripen in the present. We form our own personality by having practiced those tendencies. And we can see we're a mixture of so-called good and so-called bad. This is obvious. Then you have the kind of karma that ripens, which is all the stuff that people do to you, how you're seen by others, whether you're respected or insulted or not, all of this. And so, yeah. And then the fourth way karma ripens it's called environmental karma. And it doesn't just mean, the trees and the moon out there, environmental. It's referring to just the general way that where you live, the house you live in, how you respond to it. Is it beautiful? Is it ugly? Is it loud? Is it quiet? Is it stinky? Is it nice? I mean, all of this, you can go to some countries. We can go to some areas around, some of the neighbourhoods. Disgusting houses, all mouldy and smelly, or houses right on the freeway, noisy. And, you just keep bumping into these houses all the time. You just don't, you keep living in these ugly places. It's environmental karma. Some people just live in the most sweet places and they always seem to find the nice house with a nice view and the sun shining and the good feng shui, It's environmental karma. You can do something about it. Sometimes you can't, though. You're so stuck in some places. People stay in these places because the karma is so strong with that place. Stinky, ugly, can't get out of it, So if you think about it from this point of view then, the way you respond to your environment, and that also includes, for example, you might be really allergic to milk and you'll die if you drink milk. We can find no logic, can we, medically for this now? It's coming up more and more, isn't it? Children with diseases. I mean with, allergies. Unbelievable. People die eating peanuts, drinking milk. It's extraordinary now. Environmental karma. Someone else is nourished on milk. Very personal sometimes. And generalised. Who drinks water out of rivers anymore? I mean, I remember when I first went to India, you didn't touch water. But everywhere now, we only drink bottled water, Water that we think is more pure. Because everything's polluted. So sure, we can look at the external reasons why. Just go to see Al Gore's movie, there it is. But generally speaking, the past killing ripens collectively for all of us now in being born into this environment where it is polluted, where it's stinky. Past killing is one of the... Okay, let's use one example of one negative action and show you the 4 different ways that one action would ripen. And all actions we do, positive and negative, have their own way of ripening in these 4 ways. So, for example, killing. As I mentioned before, if that's going to be the main karma that ripens at the time of your death and it throws your mind on autopilot, then it will cause you to get a suffering life, like a lion birth or something. And there are other realms of existence as well that Buddha talks about, which we'll talk about. That's the main result of killing. So then let's say you get a human life, which is obviously the result of morality, but killing can ripen in that one as well, can't it? But as a tendency to kill. So if you've got a tendency to kill, that's the second way that killing ripens. The third way that killing ripens is in your being killed. The experience similar to the cause. You know, you're being killed, or you're dying young, or you're getting sick. They're all the karmic result of killing. The environmental result of killing, like I said, would be, say, the water's polluted, the food is not nourishing. In other words, what's meant to nourish you actually harms you. Because if you think about the world, this interdependent scenario we live in, the external world is just a bunch of sense objects that we live in, isn't it? And obviously it's very pleasant if there's a nice interdependent scenario going on where it's all pleasing for you. If the sun doesn't harm you, the rain doesn't destroy you, you know, but everything's like a mess in the environment for us, like a really rough environment where there's volcanoes and ugly and violent and very hot or very cold or very polluted. That's the result of negative karma. But if you're living in an environment where it's very pleasing and very soothing and doesn't offend you, doesn't harm you, the water's tasty, the food's good and nourishing, that's the result of morality karma, very strongly. But none of this is punishment or reward, which is the view we have very deeply. No one's doing it to us. No one does it to us. We do it to ourselves, Buddha says, because we're the creators of it. We set ourselves up from our past actions to be born to that mother, that abusive father, that kind auntie, that lovely environment, that ugly environment, with those tendencies. You know, we're the ones who do it. We run the show, Buddha says. Not God, not Buddha, not the parents. Our own mind. So, of course, the implication of this for the future is the real point. Not just go on and on about karma. Oh, I'm so bad, oh, I'm so good. Who cares? Once you know why there's a flower in your garden now, once you understand the past, which is called botany, now you understand how to make a decent garden. Gives you the method, doesn't it? So the basic Buddhist practice is based upon understanding karma. Once you know the law of cause and effect about why you are what you are, now you know what you want to become and now you know what to do. It's very practical. Once you know what a cake is and how come it got there, now you know how to make another one. Not just go on about the cake. You move forward. So, in this lam rim packaging now, let's go back to that other packaging, in the lam rim packaging of the teachings, which I mentioned briefly last night, this Tibetan packaging. Karma comes in the junior school part, in the first scope of practice. And it's really the essence. You know, you've got these different levels of practice, the basic level, the more the middle, and then the most advanced, right? Just like stages of practice, you know. Like I keep calling it junior school, high school, like that. Well, the culmination of the first level of practice is abiding by the laws of karma. Just learning about karma, understanding that this is what occurs, this is the law that determines whether you're happy or suffering, knowing, crucially, that you don't want more suffering. It's like learning about food. You don't want suffering, so you learn to know what food you shouldn't eat. Well, the karma's like that. You learn to know what causes suffering. You know you don't want future suffering, so you avoid doing those things. You avoid sowing the seeds in your mind that would ripen in the future as you're suffering. It's really common sense. It's the most basic level of practice. It's common sense. So the most basic level of practice then is mainly concerned with avoiding harming others. It's sort of a minimal level. Just basically watch your body and you watch your speech. They have this saying, when you're with others, you watch your behaviour. When you're with others, you watch your behaviour. You don't, basically. And why, mainly at this point, is not because of others' compassion yet. That's more advanced. This first level is because you understand the simple logic that if you kill and you lie and you steal and you badmouth, guess who will suffer in the future? So this is all to do with compassion for yourself, really. And often we feel this is all a bit sort of inferior, but this is not a very good reason to do things, we'll say. It just sounds like self-centered. Well, you're going to be selfish, Dalai Lama says, be wisely selfish. Don't harm others. Be wisely selfish. It's good for you. We've got to first look at what causes suffering. And all Buddha's saying is why we suffer in this life is because we've harmed others in the past. So given that I don't want to suffer in the future, then I stop harming now. It's common sense. It's practical. There's no even looking at our minds too much yet. That's more advanced, you know. Being your own therapist. That's like high school. The very first level of practice is you've got to control your body and speech. Because that's what does the harm, isn't it? If you've got uncontrolled behaviour and you explode out with words every 2 minutes and you punch people in the nose every 2 minutes, then how can you possibly look at your mind? Don't be ridiculous. No chance, no opportunity. You've got to calm your mind, your body and speech down first. And that's the first level of practice. The first level of practice. Abiding by the laws of karma. Learning to know what not to do so that you don't suffer in the future. It's the most basic level, but already pretty profound. If the world could see, if we could all see on this earth that there are implications to ourself of our own actions, wouldn't we be amazing people? And this shows really, if you look at the world, how utterly cut off from ourselves we are, how schizophrenic, as Lama Yeshe would sometimes put it. We really are. How totally cut off from our own reality. In other words, we do not see. Forget about anger, just your own feelings. I'm talking about the actions. We don't see that my harming others with my body and speech actually brings harm to myself. We don't get that at all. And I even forget about future suffering. Look at right now. It's obvious. If you look at a person who's really angry and uncontrolled and berserk, you can tell they're harming themselves right there. You can see it right there. Forget about future karma. But we're so stupid we can't even see this. Because you know why? There are various reasons why. And it's these wrong views we have in our mind. Because I'm so convinced that Fred is the cause of my suffering, because I'm so convinced he is the cause of my suffering, I will shout and yell and punch him back and say, but I'm allowed to be angry. I must retaliate. In other words, it so removes me from recognizing that my anger and my punching will destroy me. We can't see this. It's just absolutely stunning, but we can't see it. It shows how nutty we are, you know. It shows how unintelligent we are. We just don't get it. Because we're so obsessed with blame. We're so obsessed with this victim mentality. It's a bit like someone stabs you. Well, Robina, you better pull it out, darling. You're bleeding. What do you mean pull it out? Fred put it there. That's how we are. We're so stupid. It's unbelievable, really. We're so locked out of our own reality. We can't see. I mean, just even anger itself that burns you up. Forget about even what you do on the basis of it. We don't see how that harms us. And a good example for me was this in Kentucky, where we've got some people on death row. And I used to go every year. I haven't been for a couple of years now. But they told me about this guy years ago who used to visit them on death row, an old Catholic man. And this old guy, 30 years ago or more, I forget, his daughter had been murdered, okay? So obviously, out of his brain was suffering. Unbelievable grief. But commonly, like a lot of people, unbelievable rage. Now, first of all, we think the grief and the rage go together, don't we? This is even before I go further on that story. This is a really interesting point. We assume that if someone harms you, that it's natural, as we'd say, it is natural to be angry. So if someone harms your daughter, kills her, then of course the grief, but we just assume it's natural to be angry. We don't even separate them as separate emotions. But that straight away we can see it's not true. I remember after the Columbine business, watching the television, and they interviewed a bunch of parents of different children whose, you know, parents of children who'd been murdered by other kids. And it was really clear, just by the interview with a few of the people, that one woman, a mother, wasn't angry. She was full of grief, but she wasn't angry, so she didn't blame. She felt compassion for the child who killed her child. And she said, people are shocked. They say, but isn't that letting your child down? She said, of course not. So what was evident was, you looked into her face, you could see she was sad, but somehow you could see that she didn't suffer so much. And then there was a father, same program. He was angry as well as had grief. And it was really clear when you looked at him that he was out of his brain. He was just absolutely insane because he couldn't, I mean, the anger was what was destroying him. He wanted the child who killed his child to burn in hell forever. He would never forgive anybody. He was just beside himself with rage. And you could see his suffering was unbearable. It wasn't the grief that I'm talking about. It was the anger. But we don't think that in the West. We just assume it's normal. Because you think, why? Because you're an innocent victim. No one posits karma. There's no reason why his daughter would be murdered. And anger is the response. And he was never going to give it up. Why? He'd let his daughter down. This is what people think. Well, this old guy who visited on death row, he said that. He said it took him like 30 years to slowly, painfully realise that why he suffered all those years was his unbelievable rage. So when he let go of the rage, he became a happy man again. His daughter was dead. The guy was executed. And there he was carrying this monster with him. And we think it's good. I mean, it shows how crazy we are. But we don't even think we can get rid of it. And the fact is we don't want to get rid of it because we think it's good and we think we're allowed to have it. And because we don't realise it causes us suffering. So, I mean, there's so many, we can see the reasons why we're so miserable, you know, because we don't get the implications for ourselves of our own very personality. We're so distressed, we're so disturbed. Even we go to our therapists. Many therapists have this view. All they do is talk about, you know, try to find the way the father did this and the mother did that. Of course we've got to do that first, to look at the external conditions. But finally you've got to look at your own mind, because that's where the causes are. So of course, if you have the view of karma, like these Tibetans, and you're born with it, and this is what you've had from the beginning, then you bypass the need for anger at all. And I'm not joking. That, you know, a lot of the people, you don't even have anger as a propensity. So a friend of mine, a Tibetan monk, I always quote this story, I met him at our monastery in Courtin. He in 87, like with a lot of the young monks and nuns, he began to demonstrate, you know, against the Chinese. And it was the first sort of little mini uprising, really, since 59. And they all got arrested and tortured, and he was tortured. And, you know, then his friend had his head blown off, and then he escaped eventually, and his father was murdered, brother was murdered. As a result of his escaping, they were all on hit lists and things. And so he was telling me about this, and he was sad, of course. And I said, do you ever get angry? And he burst out laughing. He said, angry? What for? And then he said, it's our own fault. Now those words are quite shocking to us. They sound heavy. But he just meant in a very casual way, it's karma. So what I really, see, that takes time for us to get, because it really, psychologically, for us to kind of wear that. But for him, because there he's born into this world, which is called Tibet, due to his own past karma, he's born with no propensity for anger. And I know the man. He doesn't have anger. It doesn't arise in his mind, you know. But there he was, due to karma being harmed. So he left. So his response to it isn't anger, because anger is, why are you doing this to me? Who do you think you are? You should not be doing this. There is no cause for you to do this. That's what anger is saying. It's the voice of a victim. I'm not being mean now, but analyze it. So if you don't feel like a victim, if you know you're in this situation because you created the cause, then your response wouldn't be anger. Like I said about the Dalai Lama, that's not one of their options. Their option is, what can we do about this? But you're owning it as your own past experiences coming back. So it's a very courageous view, you know. So we have to practice that, that's all, because anger is our normal thing. Aversion, freaking out when something goes wrong, or depression. And depression is just internalized anger. We'll talk about this. Not a question of that. But I'll talk about this. Because this is really Buddha's expertise, talking about these most basic states of mind, you know, called attachment and aversion. And aversion is just a state of mind beneath anger, that's all. Attachment and aversion. These are the main diseases we've got, Buddha says. So this is where we get to the second cause of suffering in the second noble truth. The first one is the punch I did in the past. It set me up to meet Fred to get punched back. The second cause of my suffering, but really is the first one, because that's the basis even of it, doing an action of karma, doing an action, is the delusions themselves. So this gets us into understanding then the mind now, according to the Buddha, how the mind works, psychologically speaking. So when you look at Buddha's psychology, Buddha's model of the mind, if we compare it with all the sophisticated and very different models in the West, it almost seems a bit simplistic, rather kind of anger, attachment, jealousy. Oh, come on, it's more complicated than that. In other words, we don't think they are mental diseases. We call it bipolar. We call it something stress syndrome. We're inventing new names every day. But for the Buddha, they're all coming down to the packagings and the variations of these states of mind that we all know so well. And I'm not trying to make it simplistic, because the more you look into this from the Buddhist perspective, the more you can, from your own experience, you see it. So the main state of mind, the main negative state of mind, the main suffering state of mind, the main neurosis, effectively, for the Buddha, that's the basis of all the others. And it's so surprising. It's this funny, boring word called attachment. I mean, you go to a therapist and you say you suffer from attachment, they'll go, okay, you're a normal person, go home. Well, Buddha says that's the main disease. You've got mental illness, he'd say. He'd say join the club, because we've all got it. This is the bottom line. This is the fundamental one. This is the basis. This is the reason we suffer from day to day. So hearing it that way, it's kind of surprising, because it's not the view we have. It's not how we even understand what we would call attachment in the West. In fact, the word attachment in the West is not even the name for a problem. We use it interchangeably with the word love, with the word happiness, with the word pleasure, with the word liking. So we really do need to understand exactly how Buddha is seeing it. Because if it is true we are suffering because of attachment, we'd better know what he means by that. But as Lama Zopa says, because we misunderstand it and we're too superficial in our understanding, when we hear that we have to give up attachment, we think, oh, you mean I've got to give up my heart? I've got to give up my happiness? So we hear Buddha wrongly. So then we hear it all as fundamentalist. We hear him saying that we've got to be miserable, and long-faced and long miserable, because we don't really listen to it and go into it deeply enough internally, experientially. As Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. You'll never begin to understand it until you build up something deeply in your own mind, in your own meditation, in your own self. It takes time to internalize, to really understand what we would just take for granted as ordinary feelings. We don't give them much depth in our comprehension of them. So let's look a bit into that. Well, let's look at one way to looking into the Buddha's understanding of the mind, and the more we get this, the more it helps us understand, is to understand this very surprising idea that emotions are based in thoughts, come down to thoughts, come down to concepts. They come down to being a story about something, or, as we said, a viewpoint. Anger is a viewpoint. Attachment is a viewpoint. And when we describe it, you'll see quite simply it's true. So the common characteristic, the characteristic that's common to what Buddha would call negative states of mind, you've got your positive, your negative, and your neutral. So let's forget the neutral. So the distinguishing characteristic of the negative ones, the thing that separates them from being a positive one, are some characteristics, quite simple, but take time to investigate, one of them in particular. But the first one, and this is indicated by a term that's used to refer to these negative states of mind, and it's simply disturbing emotion. So that's what we've been talking about already. Check the last time you were jealous, angry, depressed. It was disturbing, wasn't it? To you. not to mention the person you badmouthed or punched. You were disturbed right there, having it. And this is what I'm saying, that we're so separate from ourselves, we don't even notice it. I mean, we know we're disturbed, but we're so obsessed with you being the cause of it, we don't get the simple lesson that I could change it. You know, it's disturbing, so I can change it. It's like the food's taste, revolting taste, stop eating it. We understand that. The anger's hurting you. Stop having it. We don't think it's possible. And I don't think I should, because I think it's your fault. So, you know, this is what I'm saying. So when we really can get this one, we're going to become very intelligent. This is what this guy took 30 years to realise, that his own anger was why he was suffering. When he gave that up, he became loving, compassionate, went back to Mass, you know, became compassionate to others. Disturbing emotions. So that's fairly obvious. But there's another term that's used, and this is the one, delusions, and this is the really tasty one. Delusion. So like I say, you know, if someone were to accuse you of being delusional, you'd be extremely offended. We know very well what delusional means. It means you're not in touch with reality, doesn't it? Very simple. Well, you know, that's exactly, like we talked last night, that is exactly what Buddha's saying. It's so tasty. He is saying the extent to which our minds are caught up in these neurotic emotions, but not just those, but these misconceptions, like the one of karma, the one of creator, and all this. He's just positing this, right? The extent to which we're caught up in these neurotic emotions that we call anger, jealousy, attachment, pride, and all these things, is the extent to which we are not in touch with how that event, that person, that thing exists. This is what's fascinating. So the characteristic of these negative emotions, these negative states of mind, these disturbing emotions, these delusions, is that when you're in the throes of it, what you're experiencing is experienced in a distorted way. You're not accurate in what you're seeing. So when you're really attached to chocolate cake, what's happening is the delusion called attachment, its main job, its kind of core job, and it's got lots of jobs, and we'll talk about it, its core job is to lie to you about what the cake really is. So what's attachment seeing? It's seeing a really divine, delicious cake out there, vibrating deliciousness at you, just begging you to eat it. That's what we see, isn't it? Well, Buddha says that's a lie. When you're in love with that person, they appear just divine. Everything about them, their toenails, their hair, their nose, their smell, everything about them is just so divine, isn't it? So delicious. So you believe that story. So then on the basis of this, what do? You frantically hanker after that person. You desperately need them. You manipulate to get them. You're absolutely convinced that when you get them, you'll get happiness. Now, all of this, Buddha says, is a big bunch of lies. And attachment's just pulling you by the nose. It's not true. It's not an accurate assessment of this person. It's not an accurate assessment of the cake. There's some truth there, but you've distorted the truth. You've exaggerated the truth. You've embellished, attachment embellishes the truth. Attachment, in other words, sees more than what is really there. It exaggerates it. And then we believe in what we see. And then you run after it. And so what else can you get but disappointment? Because it isn't what you think it is. So attachment is a fantasy. Attachment is a liar that causes the thing, the person, the event to look far more delicious, far more divine than it really is. And then because attachment at the energetic level is just this bottomless pit of neediness, craving, grasping frantically unbelievable, unbearable dissatisfaction that frantically wants something else to fill up the gaping hole, that then causes you to manipulate to get it, to expect it to give you that happiness that you're convinced it will give you, and then to possess it as you and yours when you get it. We know all these things. Control freak, possessive, needy. They're all the variations of the job of attachment. They're the scenario of attachment. They're all attachment. So it's the bare bones of attachment is it's a thought, it's a viewpoint that says the cake is really divine and that when I get it I'll get happy. Well, that's a wrong viewpoint, Buddha says. It's just not accurate. Check out your last experience of getting cake. What did you end up with? A stuffed stomach. And you know what? The worst part of the suffering is you ended up with the craving for even more cake. As my mother used to say, the more you get, the more you want. That's the real suffering of attachment. In other words, attachment is the junkie mode. The more you get, the more you want. Especially we can see it with strong objects like cigarettes, you know, heroin, sex, the things we're attached to. The more you get, we think it will alleviate the pain, but all it does is create the cause for you to crave it even more, because we're bottomless pits. So they're all the lies that attachment tells us, which we can prove fairly easily from our own experience, but which we don't want to prove because it's too painful, it's too unbearable. And we don't know how to dissect the experience, you know. So there's nothing wrong with pleasure. Don't think there is. But the trouble is, we don't know how to distinguish the pleasure from the attachment. We don't know how to get pleasure without attachment. We don't know how to get the pleasure without getting the junk. That's our tragedy. That's why we'd rather not look at the pain, because we don't want to go without pleasure. So we're prepared to have the pain, we think, you know. Better than nothing sort of thing. So anger, aversion, very basically, aversion, the state of mind called aversion, as one Lama put it, is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So these two are absolutely, they're linked at the, what do they say? They're joined at the hip. Attachment and anger go together. You can't have one without the other. And this is a big surprise because we wouldn't think this in our ordinary life. We don't think this at all. But they're absolutely connected. Aversion is the response when attachment is thwarted. So we're going between these two 1,000,000 times a day. So when you've got them in a really extreme way, I'm not joking now, and I say it a lot, but I'm not joking, you're what they call bipolar. Because when attachment's getting what it wants, and it's really flying high, you think you're Mozart, you think you're God. You go berserk, you lose it, you're up there in the sky somewhere. Then where can it go but crashing down? Because it's a fantasy. That's the down mode of the bipolar. But we're having 1,000 mini bipolar method, you know, episodes a day, basically. You get what you want, you get all excited, oh, I've got the green light, no, the food's great, no, wow, it's fantastic. And then suddenly something goes wrong. Oh my God, it's so depressing. You know? So the more high, the more low. So we think the high is the happy. And we don't think you can have that, the low without the, we don't think you can have happiness without the low. So we make all romantic notions about it, make it all very poetic and dramatic, you know. You've got to have the ups to have the downs. You've got to have the downs to have the ups, and all these creative people up and down like yo-yos, you know. Well, it's unstable. It's called attachment and aversion. Attachment and aversion. But these are so subtle, okay? These words are sort of gross, and we hear them in a gross way. But the experience of attachment and aversion go to unbelievably subtle degrees. That even with the therapy that we have in the techniques we use in the West aren't nearly subtle enough to help us dissect them. This is why in Buddhist views you've got to go to the subtle level of your mind through meditation to really deconstruct this sophisticated structure of these delusions. They go to extremely subtle levels. We just scrape the surface when we work at a gross level. Better than nothing, but a long way to go to get to the heart of them, you know, to deconstruct them completely. So attachment and aversion, they're the two main states of mind we go between. So what's interesting about the aversion one, you know, you've got some people who are volatile and who, when they don't get what they want, will smash out. And other people, when their attachment is thwarted, they go in. And that's the depression one. Really. It's hard to see it initially. But the more we understand, using Buddha's model of the mind, the more we understand this attachment and aversion and how they work, you can see it. So behind anger, no, if you look at attachment, it's this frantic, constant, frantic, automatic, autopilot, constant, frantic need to get everything as I want it every split second. And that's what we think happiness is. So we're constantly trying to keep it up there, keep it going, get everything nice. Now, when we observe our mind very deeply, we will see the split second it's thwarted, panic arises. Panic, actually fear. So for the person who's very volatile and angry, that would manifest as a smash, Like, this is unbearable. How dare you smash? The person who doesn't have that tendency, but still has aversion, then that panic arises, and then it goes in. It goes in and becomes this anxiety, and the fear, and the hopelessness, and the low self-esteem, and all of this. All these are variations, you see. It's very interesting. We've got to look at it so carefully, so subtly, at our own mind. And we see it every day, ever more deeply, ever more subtly. This is practice. So it's interesting, they talk about, in Buddhism, they talk about the fears of samsara. So this word samsara, it sounds like it sounds like the place where we're allowed to have sex, drugs and rock and roll, isn't it? And you have to give it up for boring old nirvana, We hear it in that way. Well, nirvana is just a word, speaking loosely, that you can use to refer to the state of mind of the person who's depolluted their mind, who's got rid of the neuroses, who's blissfully clear and wise and content and loving and compassionate. I mean, at a pretty subtle level. We can say, loosely speaking, that's nirvana. I mean, quite a subtle level of having developed that. And then samsara is just the opposite, is being caught up in the neuroses. So the extent to which you have attachment, anger, pride, jealousy and all the other rubbish is the extent to which you're in samsara. That's all it means, It's not some moralistic meaning. So the Buddha would say that fear is the nature of samsara. Fear is the nature of these delusions. And the root one, even beyond the attachment, effectively from day-to-day life point of view, attachment is the main cause of the day-to-day suffering. But beneath even that, Buddha talks about even a more primordial delusion that we don't even give a name to in the West. And this is simply called in Buddhism ignorance. But it's got a very specific function. Colloquially, it's called ego grasping. Ego grasping. And its function is, again, it's a misconception. It is a viewpoint. And this is the subtlest, most primordial viewpoint that Buddha says is the root of all samsara, is the root of all suffering. And again, colloquially speaking, it just is this clinging, this spontaneous, primordial, deeply ingrained, instinctive clinging to this sense of self, to this neurotic sense of I, the neurotic sense of I. So subtle, so primordial. Like I said, we don't even label it in Western psychology. But we have a name for it. In a certain way it manifests. It's curious. We call this thing instinct for survival. It's interesting, isn't it? What we mean by that is when you're threatened, when an animal is threatened, this powerful fear arises that causes us to lash out to protect ourselves. Right? Well, that's interesting. That is ego grasping. That's the symptom of ego grasping. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, when you've cut that, when you've deconstructed that and removed it from your mind, which is what they mean when they say you've realized emptiness, and we'll talk about this obviously, he says, there is no fear. Fear finished. The fears of samsara have finished. The mind is only blissful. This is so shocking for us to hear, because again, absolutely we take it as a given, as a scientific fact, that fear is normal. This instinct for survival is normal when you're threatened. It's what runs the world. Buddha says it's called ego grasping, and it's the root delusion. So basically, how would you be if you didn't have this ego grasping and didn't have attachment and didn't have anger and didn't have jealousy and all the rest? Because that's what Buddha is saying is the meaning of freedom from suffering, when you finally cut all of those. Which from the Western point of view is quite a shock, because we were all born this way, and it seems unnatural to us to think we can get rid of all of these. You know, if I would go to my therapist and ask him for methods to get rid of all anger, all jealousy, all fear, all instinct for survival, all drama, and fully develop in all the positive qualities, he'll think I'm a bit crazy and give me a pill and lock me up, won't he? You understand my point? So, you know, in other words, you can say, really, Buddha's being much more radical in his view of what we can achieve psychologically. He's far more radical. He's far more outrageous. He says we can develop astonishing levels of bliss and clarity and wisdom and love and compassion and joy that are stable. You know, not just hit and miss. And that have nothing to do with something on the outside world. He says like that. In other words, Buddha does not give equal status to the positive and the negative states of mind, which is what all the psychological models that we know about do. We give them equal status. We're all born this way, we'll say. Bit of love, bit of anger, bit of jealousy, bit of this, bit of that. As long as you keep them fairly rounded, you're a nice rounded human being. But a bit too much attachment, you're a bit off, you know. But Buddha would say he's got a more fundamental baseline. Buddha would say the norm is perfection. The norm is perfection. Anything less than that, you're mentally ill. And we're all mentally ill, he says. As long as you've got attachment, jealousy, ego, fear, you're mentally ill. It's a great term, mentally ill. He would have loved it. Mentally ill, it's great. We're all mentally ill, Buddha says. It's just a question of degree. We're all bipolar. It's just a question of degree. We're all junkies. It's just a question of degree. We've got these terms, and they're great terms. And then when we can apply them to the Buddhist view, it's quite shocking. But it's exactly, Buddha would have loved these terms we use in the West. They're great, you know. They describe exactly how he's saying it, you know. But he says it in this nice way. We just think it's this nice, cute Buddhism, you know, of being mindful, watching your mind, be careful, you know. Float along, being a good person. These Tibetans love their enemies because they watch their breath or something. We kind of mystify what Buddha says. We don't see it. You know, we think in the West we're being all tasty and psychological, you know. We all know what's going on, but poor old Buddhists, they talk about mindfulness, for God's sake. They talk about giving up attachment. How sweet, you know. How naive. Anyway, it's nearly lunchtime. Okay, that'll do for now. Food for thought. So listen, you're going to, part of your thing, you're going to have a discussion group. 12:30 till 2:30, I think, wasn't it? You have a discussion group at 2:30, I think, isn't it? Remember?
3 to 4.
Oh. 3 to 4. Okay, that's fine. All right. Then, so then at 3, what you're going to do is grab a couple of you. Go to sit in a group of about 3 or 4, no more. It's really nice to do it in small groups because it's got to be one-on-one. And what you're going to do is taking the kind of the Tibetan kind of debating model where you rip this stuff to pieces. They've got this very sophisticated methods in Tibet, in their monastic universities, that they use to deconstruct the stuff, and using very rigorous logic, you know, to deconstruct it all and question it all to come to the truth. So this is the point here. So then go and sit, grab 3 of you, 2 of you, 4 of you, whatever, and then take one or more, but try and even just take one of the topics. And to the extent that you've heard anything about it today, don't speculate. It's like it's math class. You wouldn't go and speculate about stuff you've never heard of. You just take what you've heard and you discuss just that, wouldn't you? Be very clear about it. So take just what you've heard Well, okay, maybe what you've known from before that's also part of this, but don't just speculate and wander off into the trees and get lost in your head, you know. Keep on the track. So we've talked about, so one topic which is really simply good to discuss is this idea of continuity of mind. And trying to just nail it down, you know. And so try to see, if it was so, you know, if it was so, that mind is beginning to try and track it and see how it works, just even intellectually. That's one good topic. Another one, okay, karma, you've heard a bit about karma. The idea about karma. And we've just touched on a bit about the states of mind. So these three topics, you know, how psychologically, these delusions. So the characteristics, just to remind you, the characteristics of the delusions, where they're fundamentally different from the positive qualities, is that they're disturbing and they're lies, they're delusional, they're fantasies. Whereas, and I didn't finish that, but I'll say that now to give you the context, the positive qualities, love, kindness, generosity, patience, all of these variations of them, they are not disturbing and they're not deluded. They're more realistic, in other words. We haven't gone into this at all, but it's just to say it here. So to look into to try to look into the negative states of minds, the ones that are disturbing, how they are delusional, how they're not accurate, how they lead you up a garden path. So we didn't even talk about that too, but just to touch on the anger for a minute. When you hate somebody, it's obvious how ugly they look to you. It's obvious every cartoonist, I think, hates George Bush because he always looks like a monkey. So it's obvious that's what they think about him, isn't it? How they draw him is showing their view of him, which is this idiot, stupid. Everybody thinks of George Bush that way. The people who don't like him, sorry. People who like him think he's great. You know, Condoleezza thinks he's great. Condoleezza, isn't it? Connie thinks she's wonderful. Lots of people like George Bush, okay? Because you don't like him, you think he's an idiot, he's stupid, he can't say English properly, he's dumb, he's backward, and he's a monkey. Every cartoon. So that shows, obviously, they have aversion for him. He looks stupid when they see him. And then that's what you see. So what you see is what you think is true, isn't it? You think George Bush is what you see. You think the chocolate cake is what you see. And this is the fundamentalist view. And this is the delusions, how they work. Attachment over-exaggerates the deliciousness and so runs after it like a kid, desperate to have it. Aversion sees the ugliness of the person and wants to push him away because he's the cause of all your suffering. So all they are is they're gross exaggerations. That's all Buddha's saying. Doesn't mean George Bush doesn't do bad things. It doesn't mean there's not something nice about the cake. But delusions exaggerate and embellish, make it extreme. But the tragedy is, as Lama Zopa said, bad enough that we see things in a deluded way. The worst part is that we believe that it's true. And this is the part that's difficult to see. Like, you know, a typical example of a really distorted view in an institutional, in a worldly sense, is like racism, isn't it? Especially in this culture. You can see it in this country, the history of this country. You can see it. That anybody who has got that, it's just a viewpoint, it's a philosophy, it's a viewpoint, isn't it? That their view is that that kind of person is this. Now, they're not saying very objectively, yes, well, I do see that person like that, but I'm quite sure it's not true. It's just my viewpoint. Well, that's very rational, isn't it? And that's how, in reality, we should be talking. But, you know, when you've got a very strong view, chocolate cakes are good, you know, pink people are bad, George Bush is wrong. That's fundamentalism. You've got a view, it's based on a delusion, and the nature of the delusions is they're concrete. You understand? They're stuck. And then you believe it, and then you have a mental breakdown, and then you have war with everybody who doesn't agree with you. That's the function of this deep ignorance. And this is the way all the delusions, they're panic-stricken, they're based in fear, they're concrete, they're narrow, and they're liars. Do you see what I'm saying? We can see how they cause us suffering. Well, that's samsara, Buddha says. So take that away, and then take one of these topics and discuss in your group, okay? And then come back with questions. Come back straight after your group at 4. We're going to have a few questions, then we can carry on again. Okay? So rejoice, we just delight again. We've talked here for 2 hours, all listening, all thinking, all analysing, all working things through, you know. And we dedicate just thinking in our own words, just thinking how fantastic all these seeds we planted. Great. May I nourish them from this second forward so I can develop my qualities, so I can be of benefit. But one more practice. Our dinner. Let's think differently about our dinner. Let's have a different view of our dinner. So normal view is attachment. Attachment, based on an empty stomach, is all excited, right? Going to walk down to the dining room and check what's there. And mentally we're going to note all the things. We'll be polite about it, of course. We're not going to be like little 3-year-olds who stomp and burst into tears if it's not what we want. But we're going to think like that inside. You know, we'll see the food we don't like. Oh, God, you know. We will smile. Oh, is this lovely vegetarian food? Or you might, oh, I love this food. This is really exciting. Get all excited and want to shove it in, you know. But we're polite about it. But this is attachment, how it works, right? So before we put the food in the mouth mindlessly, let's think differently. So let's just think for a minute that actually it doesn't have an inherent nature. It doesn't exist like this at all. It's a bit confusing to think this, but that's okay. This is emptiness. Just think. It doesn't exist the way I'm thinking it does. So then think, it's actually, you know, oceans of it. And then you imagine there's oceans of nectar in the sky, not just this one little bowl of food. Just visualize, imagine oceans of this food in the nature of bliss, so blissful. And we can just bless it with these little syllables. I'll talk about this later. O Ma Hong, O Ma Hong, O Ma Hong. So imagine it now transforms into oceans of this delicious nectar. And then now the next little thing to think, just think for a second. You want to offer it. You want to give it. So you imagine all the Buddhas and all the holy beings and all the suffering sentient beings, all the humans and the animals and all the creatures. You imagine the whole of space full. And you imagine right now, just them. You offer it to them and they enjoy it. They experience the pleasure of eating this food. And you just think this, just for a second. Delight in this. Well, you just sowed these amazing seeds in your mind by thinking this. And you've just weakened hugely, purified hugely, the usual attachment to the food that never looks and never questions and never thinks of other people, you know. So we just weakened attachment right there, just by thinking this way. So we just, you know, just bless the food and think like that. Lama Sangye Lama Che, Dejan Lama Gedante, Kungi Jekon Lama Che, Lama Namla Che Pabu. And then as Lama Zopa said one time, once you've blessed the food like this and offered it in your mind, the bigger your stomach, the better. Now it's all virtue. So please enjoy.